Welcome to the life you crave. Simple and sustainable weight loss for women who have better things to do than diet. I'm your host, Leah Pinelli. I help ambitious, badass women stop overeating, overworking, and overgiving to lose weight from a place of love. I'll help you simplify weight loss, end your overwhelm, and create the life you crave. If you like what you hear, please like and subscribe to this podcast. Let's get started.
Did you know there are actually 3 different types of overeaters? Knowing your type is the key to stopping. You can take my free What Type of Overeater Are You quiz at leahpinelli.com/quiz to find your type and your solution in under just 5 minutes. Head on over to leahpinelli.com/quiz so that you can solve this problem stat. Hey, welcome back. Welcome back to the Life You Crave podcast. We are here today to talk about, as promised in the last episode, we're talking about real summer pleasure. So in the last episode, episode 111, we talked about how to feel in control with food, even over the summer. And today, I don't know why I said tonight, it is 1:44 p.m. The sun is shining while I'm recording this. But today I want to share with you what real pleasure is. And I've talked about this before on the podcast, but I want to share today in terms of real pleasure in terms of summer, right? What does real pleasure look like in the summertime? So first, let me explain to you what real pleasure is versus, say, false pleasure. It's often easier for me to explain first what false pleasure is, and then it makes more sense. That the real pleasure will make more sense. False pleasure, what is it? False pleasure is anything that brings you pleasure in the moment, but that has a pretty big downside, or even a small downside. But typically the downside outweighs the upside. So an example of a false pleasure for me in my life is ice cream, or I should say 2 scoops of ice cream or more in a waffle cone. That is false pleasure for me. Why? Well, first of all, I love ice cream. I think ice cream is so delicious. It's one of the many gifts that I got in terms of food preferences in my 3rd trimester of pregnancy that has just not gone away, even though my son is 9. So I love ice cream, but ice cream in excess does not love me specifically. I've just learned recently that I'm probably lactose intolerant, which is causing a lot of issues when I eat ice cream. So ice cream becomes a false pleasure for me in that when I eat it, at least when I eat more than 1 small scoop, I should say, and who can eat just 1 small scoop? Well, I can. I do it all the time now. But when I eat more than 1 small scoop, I don't feel well. So I actually immediately now get bloated and I don't feel well. I feel uncomfortable. And the next day I often will pay for it with some kind of headache and or having to go to the bathroom in very uncomfortable ways. We'll just put it that way. TMI, never on this show. So ice cream is a false pleasure for me because the net impact of eating ice cream is quite negative for me. If that's a false pleasure, then you can probably guess what real pleasure is. Real pleasure is anything that has a net positive impact. And I say net, meaning that there might be some negatives to it, just like with false pleasures, there might be some positives, like ice cream is totally freaking delicious, but the drawbacks outweigh the benefits. And for a positive or a real pleasure, it's the reverse, right? The benefits outweigh the drawbacks, but they don't just outweigh them. It has to be a net positive result, right? So an example of a real pleasure for me, and I use this one often because it's one of my favorite things, is walking my dog. Walking my dog is real pleasure for me because I love being outdoors. I love being in sunshine. I'm obsessed with my dog. I love listening to audiobooks. Like I love so much about walking my dog. there's not really much of a downside to it, right? I mean, I could think some up if I wanted to, but essentially for me personally, there's really no downside to walking my dog. So and I feel so good afterwards, right? I always feel better after I walked my dog. It's great for my health. It's great for my mental health, physical health, all the things. So that is a real pleasure for me. Now, that might not be a real pleasure for you. You might not like dogs. You might not like walking. But maybe you like something else. Maybe you love bubble baths. I don't. So that wouldn't be a real pleasure for me, but maybe that's your thing. Maybe you really, truly feel so great before, during, and after taking a bubble bath. And so when you really look at the entire experience in a very holistic way, right? Looking at anticipating the thing and then actually doing the thing, and then how you feel after you've done the thing, that's how you can tell if it's a real or a false pleasure. All three of those will fall kind of into one category or the other ultimately when it comes to feeling good. And as I mentioned on the last episode, I am a woman who prioritizes feeling good all the time. Now, that doesn't mean that I do feel good all the time. Just ask my husband, right? He's like, oh, she can get real grumpy, right? It doesn't mean that I do feel good all the time, but it means that the actions that I take in my life have to add up to me feeling good in the long run. And so what I mean by that is even when I don't feel like walking my dog, I might still walk my dog, even if it doesn't really feel good, because ultimately that is an investment in my feel good bank. I know by the time I'm done walking the dog, I'll feel better. I know I'll be really glad when my dog isn't running around like a chicken with his head cut off later because he got some exercise, right? I know that ultimately it's for my own good, and therefore it feels good in the long run. Now, an example that I'll give you, since I gave you the example of ice cream and exercise, and those two don't maybe seem like apples and oranges to you. An example of a false pleasure for me would be running. I absolutely hate running. I like thinking about running, like the idea of getting my heart rate up and just being out there on my own. It's just like a quick walk in a way. I could still listen to my audiobooks. It seems like a good idea, but when I'm actually doing it, it hurts. I hate running. I never want to run. When I'm done running, I guess I feel kind of good, but I absolutely hate every single step that I take when I'm running. So that would be a false pleasure for me, because maybe I'm doing it for the benefits of running, but because I loathe it so much for my body, it becomes a false pleasure. What I really want you to understand here is that you determine, and nobody else, what are your real pleasures and what are your false pleasures. Okay, so you're like, Leah, what does this have to do with summertime and weight loss and feeling good in my own skin? Well, as I explained 2 episodes ago on episode 110, 4 tips to kill your bathing suit anxiety, pleasure is actually a non-negotiable when it comes to weight loss, because we have been, completely inundated with this idea that we have to deprive and, restrict in order to live in bodies that we feel good in. And nothing could be further from the truth, because you are hardwired to seek pleasure and avoid discomfort. So if you're signing up to be uncomfortable by depriving and restricting, you'll never stick with it. So for those of you who are like, oh, I never stick with the diet. Yeah, duh, because they're totally miserable and you're hardwired to not be miserable. So the point is that when we can really infuse our lives with real pleasure, then we actually find 2 things. One, we want to keep on treating ourselves really, really well, which when we treat ourselves well, we are less likely to overeat. We are more likely to go to bed a little earlier, get some exercise, not deprive ourselves of feeling good the next day. But also, we start to recognize that when we feel better, everyone around us feels better. It's actually a gift to everyone else to truly, truly prioritize your own pleasure, because then you just have a way better vibe, right? And everybody likes to be around people who are high vibing, right? So that's what pleasure has to do with weight loss and feeling good in your own skin. So let's talk a little bit about summer pleasure and what real summer pleasure can look like and what it doesn't look like. And what I want you to do is I'm going to share with you, I made a list myself in preparing for this podcast of what's real summer pleasure for me, Leah Pinelli, and what is it not. what is not real pleasure? What is false summer pleasure? And the reason I like to identify these things for myself is so that when I find myself maybe considering doing something that I've already identified as false pleasure, I will be more likely to be like, you know what? I'm going to opt out of that because I know that it's not real pleasure. For example, maybe staying up late, watching Netflix with my husband. That might be something that feels like real pleasure in the moment. But when I'm sleep deprived the next day and not feeling well and therefore craving chocolate and the whole cycle begins, that is not real pleasure. But maybe watching a couple of shows, and then going to bed still on time, that can feel like real pleasure. So a lot of times it's not either or. It's not like, oh, I don't do this thing or I do this thing because it's not pleasure or it is pleasure. But it's more like there's usually a point of diminishing returns, as I've talked about previously. And so when you start to find that point of diminishing returns for yourself, it totally changes the game. It changes everything because your life becomes more pleasurable, not less, right? And therefore you start eating better, you start moving better, you start sleeping better, you start living better, and you start loving people better, right? Your relationships get better because you're no longer a grumpy hot mess. And I say that with love and I speak from experience. So real summer pleasure for me, and I encourage you to make your own list. I actually am going to invite you at the end of the episode to make your own list and share it with me. I would love to hear what is on your list of real pleasure. You can share it with me by emailing me at leah@leahpinelli.com. So again, my email address is leah@leahpinelli.com. That's LIAPINELLI.com. But yeah, I would love for you to make your own list. And it's always so fascinating because when I've done this in groups before, when you share your list with other people, you give other people ideas, right? And then they add to their list. And I mean, every single one of my clients walks around with an ongoing, like on their phones, usually a list of their real pleasures that they just keep adding to. And it just keeps magnifying and magnifying and magnifying your life and amplifying your life, I should say, in just the best ways. Okay, let's get to the point. Leah's real summer pleasure list. 1, and this is the first thing I wrote without any shred of a doubt, which is sun-kissed skin. As I mentioned on the last episode, I love the sun. I love warmth, and I love the feeling of sun on my skin. Now, I do lather up with sunscreen and I wear a sun hat and I really try to keep my face out of it, but I just love the feeling of sun on my shoulders. I love being outside. That is real pleasure for me. I also really love exercise and movement in my own ways. Like I said, I hate running, but I love me some Pilates. I love hiking. I love being outdoors. I love swimming in, natural, like lakes and rivers and oceans if they're warm. I don't do well in cold, but I love that. That feels like real summer pleasure to me. And by the way, if the idea of getting in a body of water this summer makes you cringe, please go back and listen to episode 110, 4 tips to kill your bathing suit anxiety. The other thing that I really love during the summer is adventure. I want to have adventures with my family, right? I want to go and, like I said, I can't remember now if I said it. Nope, I said it on the last episode. I'm heading to Bend, Oregon, and we're going to have some really fun adventures. We're going to be whitewater rafting, and we're going to be climbing through caves. And those kinds of adventures, they're fun, especially when you're doing it with people that you love. And that is real pleasure for me. There's no downside, except for maybe a little bit of fear in the cave because I'm claustrophobic, or the whitewater rafting might have some fear attached to it, but only in the best ways. The other thing that I love about summer is it really is an opportunity to connect with my kiddo in a way that I don't really get to connect with him when he's at school all day, every day. Now, don't get me wrong. I put his ass in summer camps all summer because mama's got to work. But I love just having that extra time with him. This summer, we decided we're going to watch a movie every night that we're home. And so just getting to do fun things that, maybe we can't do during the school year. That's such real pleasure for me, that connection and that fun with family and friends. The other thing that I love to do, real pleasure, is what I wrote down here is just mind expansion for me and my family. And what that really entails is travel and really getting to expand my perspective, my horizons, my experience. I very much aspire one day, I shouldn't aspire, I plan to take my family to do community service. not necessarily in our own communities, but abroad. That is something that I very much look forward to doing. And also, real summer pleasure for me is deep rest for the purpose of rejuvenation. Now, I can get deep rest any season, but summertime, it's a little bit different because especially, for example, winter is a time of deep, deep rest for me. However, summer is a different type of rest. It's rest to increase my vitality in the moment, meaning I want to get good sleep. I want to doze off on the beach. I want to really deeply rest, but I also love to bounce back in the summer. The very next thing that I wrote down on my list is focused productivity. And what I mean by that is summer is such a vibrant time, right? There's so much good energy and fun to be had over the summer. And I used to drink all summer long when I was a bartender and a, younger woman. But I found that all that drinking actually just depleted my energy levels. And so I would get to the end of the summer and I wouldn't really feel that great. And I would also maybe not have accomplished what I wanted to accomplish, but I certainly didn't have the energy that I wanted to have. And so as I've talked about in the last 3 episodes, including this one, it's all about that point of diminishing return and starting to recognize, okay, the deeper I rest, the more rejuvenated I am when I wake. And the more rejuvenated I am when I wake, the better I feel, the more fun I have, the more connected I am to family, the more energy I have for whitewater rafting, but also more focused and productive work. Because I do work over the summer, as most of us do, and I really want to contain my work so that I can have more time, more expansiveness for my family and for fun and adventure. But I don't want to be any less productive at work. So productivity does not equal time spent. It truly equals focus, right? So the more focused I am, the more energy I have, the more I can produce in a shorter period of time. And then the more time I have to go lay on the beach with the bam bam. Right? So that is something else that feels like real summer pleasure to me. Focused work that is for the purpose of rejuvenation for the purpose of more focused work and more connection and family. And then the last thing I have on my list that feels really good, feels like real pleasure, is to feel strong and to feel fit and to feel good in the skin that I'm in. So that real pleasure means I still prioritize getting to my Pilates classes. I still prioritize exercise, even when I'm traveling, even when I'm walking the dog. I'm sorry, that made no sense. Even when I'm traveling or walking the dog at home, meaning I'm going to prioritize those things because that gives me that result of feeling strong, fit, and good in the skin that I'm in. It also prevents me from day drinking, right? All day long, which so many of us do. And then we find that we don't feel good. Okay. So what are some false pleasures for me over the summer? False pleasure. Well, one of them, as I already mentioned, is eating too much ice cream, which ice cream is so great during the summer, but not if it's a false pleasure for you. As I mentioned on the last episode, fried food can come up a lot during the summer. There's a lot of travel, a lot of French fries everywhere, all kinds of appetizers and restaurant meals, and things tend to be more fried in restaurants than maybe they are at home. Those are false pleasures for me. They taste amazing and delicious in the moment, and then I don't feel well. Anything that depletes my vitality is something that is automatically on my false pleasure list. Again, diminishing returns. Alcohol would be a false pleasure and is a false pleasure anytime I exceed a certain amount because I don't feel good and it impacts my vitality the next day. But alcohol is on my real pleasure list when I drink it slowly and really enjoy it and pair it with certain foods and have an entire experience around the cocktail or the wine that I'm drinking. Not just drinking for drinking's sake. You know what else is a false pleasure? Well, speaking of alcohol, is hangovers. Not that hangovers would ever be a real pleasure, but they are definitely not a part of my summer vitality plans, my real pleasure plans. And last but not least, and I kind of alluded to this before, but overworking and over-focusing on, the things that are not actually what I value is a false pleasure. And what I mean by that is I get so much pleasure from my work. I love my work. I was born to do this work. I'll do it every day until the day that I can't do it anymore, which hopefully is until the day I die. I love coaching. And I love helping women stop overeating and really create the lives that they crave. that being said, I could work 24/7. Full transparency, I'm recording this at 2 p.m. on a Sunday while my family's out hiking. But I say that because overworking, I know, is something that comes up for a lot of my listeners. You all are high achieving, career driven women, and it is so easy to get consumed by our work because we're driven or we love it or both. And so that can often be a false pleasure that I don't recognize until, after the fact. And so I always want to go back to my list of real pleasures and make sure that I've got a balance. I do have focus and productivity on my list of real pleasures, but it is time bound, time restricted, so that I don't let it just like with food, there's that point of diminishing returns. Just like with anything, there's a point of diminishing returns. So really recognizing that work is so fulfilling and pleasurable to me, but also only up to a point. And then I got to take a break and go to the pool, which is exactly what I'm about to do as soon as I'm done recording this podcast. So I hope that you make your own list of real pleasures versus false pleasures. And, I recommend you make it on your phone and just review it every now and again and add to it as you think of things, right? Like ice cream didn't used to be a false pleasure for me. It became a false pleasure. And so eventually I moved it to the false pleasure list. But it is so life transformative when you really start to recognize that pleasure is your number one priority and you can increase your pleasure factor in so many ways. But the most impactful way that you can do it is by first determining what is real pleasure for you and what is false pleasure, and starting to reject false pleasure. You don't have to have any false pleasure in your life. There's no reason, right? And really starting to create space for real pleasure. So can I just say, episode 110 was 4 tips to kill your bathing suit anxiety. So I hope you are rocking that bathing suit. Episode 111 is how to feel in control with food. And now here we are, episode 112, which is all about real summer pleasure. How awesome is that? I mean, really, how awesome is that? If you take just these 3 episodes and you buy yourself that new suit and you're feeling good in your own skin, you're feeling in control with food, and you're increasing your pleasure factor, your real pleasure factor in your life, you are going to have the best summer ever. And I want to hear about it. So please reach out to me, share your list with me. I would love to hear what you're up to and how this podcast and all of these podcasts are serving you. Because if you weren't here, I wouldn't be either. All right, everyone. Ciao.
You've been listening to The Life You Crave. I lost 30 pounds years ago without dieting, willpower, or deprivation. I'm on a mission to help other women, including you, do the same. You can book a free weight loss strategy session with me over at leahpinelli.com. That's LIAPINELLI.com. See you on our next call or on the next episode. And remember to like, subscribe, and leave a comment on iTunes.